Most people's dream is to become a billionaire. Most people never get to make that dream a reality. I did, but getting there was so hard. I ended up hating my life as a result of it. But before I go on, make sure you give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe to Storytime Animated. Also, be sure to hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any more awesome videos. Trust me, you do not want to miss out. I grew up poor. My mom abandoned me when I was just a toddler, and my dad was a terrible father. He spent more time drinking than actually raising me. The only person in my life who actually cared for me was my uncle, and he would let me come to his apartment sometimes to get away from my dad. Sometimes when my dad got really drunk, I would call my uncle and he would pick me up and take me to the park for some ice cream. If we returned and my dad was still too drunk to be around, my uncle would let me sleep at his place. I was so grateful for my uncle. He was the only good thing in my life. We developed a really good relationship to the point where he was more of my father than my actual father. My uncle was a businessman, and he taught me all the tips and tricks to earning money. He owned a car manufacturing business, and I became almost like his protege. I worked hard, earning money steadily over the years, and by the time I was 18, my uncle had appointed me as one of the managers of his company. For many more years, I helped build his brand into $1 million company, but I felt I was being held back. Sure, I loved my uncle, but I didn't really agree with some of his ways. For starters, he always bought the highest quality materials when he could buy things for much cheaper and earn a lot more profit. I decided I needed to make my own company. So I started up my own car manufacturing company, and things boomed. I was earning millions and millions of dollars. My uncle didn't approve though. He said I was cheating my customers and that was wrong. But I didn't care. I was foolish and young and greedy, and I just wanted more money. Before long, my company rose to such heights that it overtook my uncle's original company. He was losing money and I knew he needed help, but I didn't offer to lend him a hand. I regret that to this day. I ended up buying his company off him for a really low fee, and now I had 2 massive companies under my control, earning millions of dollars each year. I invested in all sorts of things, from the stock market to other businesses, and by the time I was 25, I was a billionaire. But I hated my life. I had no friends, no real family, no one who really cared for me. I had betrayed my uncle, the only person I truly loved. And now I had no one. Even worse, my father had suddenly come back to me, and he was acting all nice. It was unlike him. I knew he was only acting this way because he wanted money from me. Of course, I gave him some. I didn't want him to starve, and he was my father. I felt like I had to help him. For years, my money grew and grew, but my happiness only declined. I was always working, so I never had the chance to make friends. My uncle had moved abroad. I had no idea where he was. Life was miserable. But then I met someone. This woman, her name was Sally. She was so beautiful and kind-hearted, and I was truly in love with her. I treated her to all sorts of gifts. My father told me that she was only in it for the money, but I didn't listen to him. Who was he to speak anyway? I knew he was only in it for the money too. After our first few dates, I was in love with her. I really wanted to marry her. She told me she didn't want my money too. That made me truly believe she loved me for me. But then I discovered something that changed everything. We were at home when Sally's phone suddenly got a lot of messages. I asked who it was, and she said it was just her brother, but I had a feeling she was lying. Then she got up to leave and told me she was going to meet her brother. I ended up following her out, but I kept some distance between us so she wouldn't realize I was following her. She ended up going to the mall, and as I peeked around the corner, I spotted her with this really old man who looked very rich, and she was kissing him. I was so disgusted. As it turned out, my father was right. Sally was a gold digger, and she actually had multiple boyfriends who all happened to be very old and very rich. I immediately broke up with her, but my heart was broken. Meanwhile, I had become the youngest person to earn $1 billion. I was even in magazines and newspaper headlines. My name was everywhere. Everyone knew who I was. I hated the fame too. I couldn't even go to the park without a bunch of people walking up to me, most of whom asked for money. Then, one day, I was staying in my third mansion when my staff told me a woman was at the door. They said she claimed to be my mother. I rushed out, and sure enough, there she was. I didn't have too many memories of her, but my dad always kept a photo of her hidden in his bedroom, and every now and then I would take a peek at it. It was the spitting image of my mother, except her hair was slightly graying and she had a few more wrinkles. I led her inside and sat her down in the living room. At first, no one spoke. I was still shocked to find my long-lost mother here in my home 20 years after she abandoned me. I didn't know what to think. I still had much anger within me because she had abandoned me, but I also felt relief. Finally, I had my mom back. "I'm so sorry, my son," she said. I was shocked to hear her say that. "It's okay," I said. "No, it isn't. I abandoned you. I was selfish and I abandoned you," she said. "How did you find me?" "I saw your picture and name on the news and I had to come immediately. I had no idea where you were, but when I saw your face, I knew I had to find you." I didn't know what to think. My mother had abandoned me, but she was back. But then I wondered why she had come back. Was she just like everyone else, in it for the money? Is that why she came back? I looked at her clothing and she didn't seem poor. But then again, anyone would seek more money if they could. And I also wondered if my picture and name had been on the news, but I hadn't been a billionaire, would my mother still have searched for me? I had no clue, but I decided to ask her something that had bothered me for a long time. "Why did you leave me?" I asked sadly. My mother took a deep breath. "I left because your father was so cruel, and I couldn't handle it anymore. I wish I could have taken you, but I felt you were better off with your uncle nearby. I didn't have enough money to support the both of us." "But," my voice cracked, "but didn't you miss me? How could you walk out on your own son?" My mother looked down and she started to cry. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. I couldn't help it. I told her I forgave her and I let her live with me. I was honestly just so glad to have my mom back. I had missed her so much. For a few months, she lived with me and things were pretty great. I found she was so kind and there were tons of habits she had that I had inherited. Like when she was concentrating, she always stuck out her tongue. I did the same thing. And when she laughed, she made a funny sound like a dolphin, just like me. It was so cool getting to know my mom, and she seemed really interested in my life too. She said she wanted to catch up on all the years she'd missed out on. But then things went downhill. Pretty soon, I learned the real reason why she was here, and it broke my heart. She had been living at my mansion for around 6 months. I was at work, but I decided to come home early so we could have dinner together. I stepped into my home, but I couldn't seem to find her anywhere. I looked around, and then I walked into my bedroom. What I saw made my jaw drop. My mother was rummaging in my cupboard, stealing my things. In her pocket, I could spot a few of my expensive watches, and she even had the nerve to take a diamond earring that had belonged to my ex-girlfriend. I cried out and she froze, guilt plastered on her face. I realized she was the same as everyone else before her. She was only in it for the money too. I told her she couldn't live with me anymore. I would support her and I would send her money each month, but I didn't want anything to do with her. Was there no one in my family who truly cared for me? Not my money? Then I remembered my uncle. He was the only one who had loved me, truly. I realized I had to find my uncle. I had to find out where he was. I didn't care about the money anymore. If I could switch out my billions of dollars for my uncle's forgiveness, I would do so in a heartbeat. I ended up hiring a private investigator to locate him. After weeks and weeks of searching, my private investigator notified me and discovered my uncle was living on a remote island in the Caribbean. I didn't hesitate. I booked the next available flight and I flew right over. When I arrived, I found him sitting at a local cafe with a coconut in hand, wearing a flower chain around his neck. He looked so relaxed. I walked up to him and I knelt by his side. He jumped at the sight of me. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "Uncle, I'm so sorry," I said. "I've learned the wrongness of my actions. Please, I know I do not deserve it, but I beg for your forgiveness. I don't care about the money. I've discovered life is meaningless without the people who care about you. Please, Uncle, I'm sorry." My uncle seemed to hesitate, But then he smiled. "Of course I forgive you, nephew." We hugged, and everything was right between us. After he showed me around the island, I fell in love with the place, and I decided to move there. I abandoned my businesses and let them fail. I had enough money to last me for the rest of my life. For now, I could just relax and embrace the simple life. After 2 years of living there, I ended up falling in love with a local girl, and we now have 3 children. They call my uncle Grandpa. I'm not a billionaire anymore, but I love my life. It seems money truly can't buy happiness.
I always go for the worst kind of guys. I've dated some really selfish men, as well as unloyal men. Like when I was in high school, I dated the school jock, even though everyone knew he was a jerk. He was so up himself, and he thought everyone was below him. But I still had a huge attraction to him. I don't even know why. He wasn't that handsome either. I guess I just had really bad taste in men. In college, I started pursuing this guy who had a big reputation for cheating on girls. You probably think I'm really stupid, but you have to understand, I was in love. It doesn't make any sense, but sometimes you can't help the way you feel, right? Well, when I met my billionaire husband, I thought that for the first time, I was attracted to someone who wasn't a jerk or a cheat. His name was Tom, and he was so kind and sweet. I believe things were going to work out amazing between us. I couldn't have been more wrong. But first, before I dive into this juicy story, please make sure you like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any more juicy content. Thank you. I really appreciate it. When I met Tom, I thought I'd found the perfect man to be my husband. We met at a friend's wedding, and when I saw him, I immediately knew I was in love with him. He was at the buffet helping himself to some food, and he was dressed in a cute tuxedo, and his brown hair was all ruffled and messy. He was so handsome, and to top it all off, he was so nice to me too. He immediately complimented me on my dress and told me I was beautiful. I have to admit, I was pretty much in love with him at that moment, within a few minutes of first meeting him. That's another thing. I fall in love really easy. Anyway, we started dating, and I couldn't believe he would date me, of all people. I wasn't pretty at all, or that's what I believed, and I didn't really think I was that interesting. But he seemed to like me. He would buy me tons of expensive gifts too, and we would go on vacation a lot. On our third date, he bought me this huge diamond necklace, which must have cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. I couldn't believe it. I asked him how he could afford something like this, and he just said I shouldn't worry about it. I wanted to dig a little deeper, so I did some research and found out he was the owner of this massive car company. That's when I realized my boyfriend was a billionaire. Well, that just made me love him even more. After a few months, I was just about ready to marry him. He was the perfect guy, handsome, kind, generous, and then finally Tom proposed. He paid for this romantic dinner by the seaside and had a small violinist come over to play while he proposed. It was so romantic. We moved into a new house, a huge mansion with over 7 bedrooms and even a cinema, and everything seemed perfect. But it was far from it. At first, things were fine. Actually, probably the happiest I'd ever been. But as the weeks went by, I found Tom started to change. He would switch from his previously kind character and started asking me to do a lot of stuff around the house, like sweep and clean. It didn't make sense though, since he could easily afford a maid. But before long, I almost felt like the maid of the house. Since I didn't have a job and Tom was the one who mainly worked, I thought my life would be pretty carefree. But that wasn't the case. Tom made me do all sorts of chores, some of which were really hard, and I found myself exhausted by the end of the day. This wasn't how a husband should treat his wife. It was rude and selfish, but I supposed he was earning all the money, so I convinced myself that maybe this was the right thing to do. One day, Tom came home from work and asked me to put on this costume for him. I was curious what he meant, but then I cried out when I realized it was a maid costume. I told him no, I wouldn't wear it. And why did he want me to anyway? But then he started yelling at me and he got really mad. And I don't know, I guess I just wanted to please him. So I said I'd wear it. Tom made me wear the maid uniform every single day. It was so humiliating. He made me wash his clothes, sweep the house, clean the kitchen, do everything you can imagine a maid could do. But in truth, I was fine doing it if it meant he was happy. Once I embraced my role as his maid, He was so nice all the time and always treated me kindly. I believed what I was doing was worth it. But then came that fateful day. It was Tom's birthday, and I was planning this huge surprise party with all of his friends from work. I organized all the food, drinks, and entertainment. When he finally arrived, he was so shocked. I ran up to him to wish him a happy birthday, but he seemed to kind of ignore me. I thought maybe he just hadn't noticed me, but then he glanced at me and ordered me to start serving drinks. I couldn't believe my husband would do something like that. He still wanted me to be his maid. I had to serve everyone, and no one realized that I was his wife. I walked up to Tom to tell him how I felt. I had had enough. "Tom, I need to speak with you," I said. "Oh, hello there," he said, as if he were speaking to a maid. He then proceeded to introduce me to his friends as his maid. "Guys, this is my maid, Amber. Don't you have work to do, Amber?" I couldn't believe my ears. Why would he do this? I thought Tom was the perfect guy. As it turned out, my record for dating the worst guys still wasn't broken. "Tom!" I shouted, and everyone at the party stopped to stare. "We're over. I'm filing for a divorce. You humiliated me for long enough, and I'm done being your maid. You can keep your money. You can take away the gifts you gave me. I don't care. I don't love you anymore." Tom glared at me with red eyes full of fury. I could tell he was so angry. Then suddenly he grabbed my arm and forced me out of the room. The party guests seemed to just think it was a problem between a boss and his maid, but little did they know I was actually his wife. Tom dragged me upstairs and I couldn't fight back. He was way too strong. He yanked my arm and then he locked me in the attic. He slammed the trap door and I heard the lock slip through. I tried to call for help, but no one could hear me over the music from the party. I was up there for hours. I couldn't believe my husband would do something like this. He couldn't just lock his wife up. That was disgusting. I realized Tom wasn't the man I thought he was. Hours passed, and eventually the party ended, and everyone went home. It seemed like Tom wouldn't be coming up for ages. I started to walk around the attic to see if there was a phone or something I could use to call the police, but I bumped into a pile of boxes, and a digital camera fell out. I bent down and picked it up curiously. It still had batteries in it. I turned it on and found a single video in its gallery. I pressed play. It was a video of a woman. She was wearing the same clothes as me, and she seemed to be sitting in the attic. She started to speak, and what she said shook me to my core. "Hi, I don't know you, and you don't know me, but if you're watching this, that means Tom has locked you up in the attic, as he did to me. My name is Tina, and I used to be the loving wife of Tom. That is, until Tom made me his maid. It might sound crazy, but Tom has done this before you. That's right, all of his recent wives, he made them his maid. And when he got bored of them, or when the wives got fed up, he fired them as if they were nothing. You may be wondering why Tom behaves this way. Let me explain. I figured this one day when I was looking through Tom's things as I cleaned. I found his diary from ages ago, and this is what I discovered. Tom hates women. Like, really hates women. His mother left him when he was young, and his father was very abusive. His father hated women, and so he taught his son the same thing. Now, to punish women, and in a way to punish his mother for abandoning him, he makes women be his maid to humiliate them. I only figured this out just now, and so I'm leaving this as a warning to any of his future wives. Get out of there. It isn't safe, and stop being his maid. Trust me, he's not worth it. The video ended, and I was numb with shock. I couldn't believe what I had just heard. Was Tom going to hurt me? What did Tina mean? I heard footsteps suddenly, and then my stomach dropped as Tom came up the attic stairs. He suddenly appeared in front of me. "Stay back," I yelled. "I know everything. I know about your past wives. I know about your abandoning mother. I know you hate women. Tina told me everything." Tom's eyes widened as I slammed him with all this new information. "What?" he exclaimed. "This is wrong, Tom. You can't hate women. Your mother may be bad for walking out on you, but that doesn't mean every woman is a bad person." I started crying. "I loved you, Tom. I really did. Why did you have to do this to me?" Then, to my surprise, Tom started to break down crying in front of me. "I'm so sorry, Amber." He was down on his knees begging. "I know it's wrong, but I just get so angry. I promise you, I won't treat you like a maid ever again. Please, I love you. Please forgive me." I turned my head. "I don't forgive you," I said, and Tom flinched at the words. "I'm done dating horrible men. I said, and with those last words, I ran past him, heading for the attic door. He tried to grab me, but I managed to slip through his fingers. I bolted down the stairs and immediately grabbed my phone and called the police, and they arrested him for holding me against my will. I can now confidently say I have a much better taste in men. My current husband is a kind, sweet, and gentle man who loves me very much, as every husband should be. And I can tell you, he does not make me clean the house every day. In fact, he does most of the cleaning around here.